And you were certain this is the right calibration, correct? Okay, good. Because if I'm gonna have a first commentary, I'd like for it to be adequate at most. A big user, a subject I'm aware of, this is going to give us more than enough energy for the station. Now, Chime, I think you'll have to go. I think it's about time to record all of this. I am still not sure I will ever get used to that. Anyways, 3, 2... So for context, I am covering a YouTuber by the name of John Wolf, and what he believes to be the ups and downs of indie horror in the present year. As a whole, I don't have many qualms with the video. I actually agree with a fair bit of it. The first bit, at least. When it gets later in... well, in regards to a certain indie horror game, that's where I take problems. I don't believe any more context is needed than that. So let's start, shall we?
And that's the problem I have with some of these mascot horror games. It's that they're just following a formula rather than making a cool game. And the reason that they're following this bare minimum formula is because it was proven that it works. Bendy and the Ink Machine. For me, this game and its sequel, Bendy and the Dark Revival, are the poster child for over-rewarded indie game mediocrity. They thrive on delivering the bare minimum. You want combat? Here, swing an axe over and over. There's no dodge, there's no block, it's just left-click spam. It's combat in name only. You want characters? Here, have some characters that you spend 2 or maybe 3 scenes with over the course of the entire game. For example, a major character in the Bendy universe is Tom. Now, a good test to see if a character has depth or not is to see if you can describe them without talking about what they look like or what their role is in the plot. And I'll be honest, I have no idea how you would describe Tom without those 2 things. Tom is in both of the games, by the way.
This reasoning feels flawed. On one part of this, I agree, both with Alice and Tom both. I personally wish both had gotten more screen time throughout their games as a whole. Dark Revival especially, given how it's just generally a longer game, and they gave more character to Alice in particular, but I'm not sure I can fully agree with the line of reasoning. Your reasoning for why Tom wasn't a good character through your own judging system was to, and I quote, see if you can describe them without talking about what they look like or what their role is in the plot. I can do this actually, but firstly, this also just feels flawed as a way of what seems to be framed as objective critique, because what counts as depth for a character is something that's rather subjective, or at least something that can have different meaning depending on what people look for in characters. As I said earlier, your problem with how little he shows up is a valid one. But if I'm to take the full scene he appears in, both games, without following the criteria you put here, sure, let me give it a shot. Tom, or Thomas Graff, is a gruff character. He's loyal to his mission of trying to end the Ink Machine and cycle. He's ill-tempered and untrustworthy. This is the short version of what I could gather about what he's like through his interactions with the player character Henry in the first game, as well as the character's facial expressions and what's said about him through the character of Alice.
Here, you must be hungry. Sorry, it's all we have.
May I also just say that trying to explain this in the manner fitting of what you consider death was way harder than it looks, because I had to stretch for material because of how annoying that last part of the criteria is. See, or what their role is in the plot, as a part of criteria made this annoying because that made it unclear to me what the plot even meant. With Tom specifically in the first game, you're able to find audio logs of him as he was when he was a human prior to the events of what had transpired at Joey Drew Studios. His personality and quotes such as,
"You can bet I won't be doing any more repair jobs for Mr. Joey Drew."
further backs up the point I made about his general personality and depth, albeit limited. To clarify, my issue here is more the way this is worded, I guess. I don't disagree with your point, because yeah, more could have been done. The fact that the information I just gave is found in audio recordings that could be missed could be seen as an issue in itself, and more could have been done in the actual story to develop the character. But the way you described this did not get your point across well at all.
Hey, Daddy Bush!
I honestly don't know what I'd summarize Bendy as, because it doesn't do anything unique or interesting with its unique and interesting setting. In fact, it does the exact opposite. It spends most of its runtime trying to do things exactly like BioShock. A city built on broken dreams.
How big is this place?
Rapture. The artist would not be insensitive.
Not really a 70s style outfit.
You can call me Elizabeth.
Oh, Audrey, what's happened to you?
Why are you talking like Wilson right now to yourself? Okay.
If I find you, I'm gonna rip your face off.
Oh, wow.
I'll teach you your face. We're always free to choose. Believe what we want to believe. A man chooses. A slave obeys.
Now, one thing I'd like to get across is that this comparison isn't an unfounded one. This is actually something that, once again, I can agree on. Bendy, or at least the first Bendy in the Ink Machine, I'm not really sure how it compares it to Dark Revival, takes a lot of inspiration from BioShock, from the story as well as the gameplay. This is rather well explained in the Bendy Controversy Revisited, a mass critique on the original Bendy in the Ink Machine, and the development by Chris Portal. I'll have that video linked in the description. But I actually want to play a clip from that video.
Over time, the narrative similarities began to stack up. A smooth-talking entrepreneur who cares only for himself creates a place that falls into ruin as he becomes more reclusive and secretive, even to those closest to him. The protagonist, who is effectively an outsider, enters said place and becomes trapped inside, encountering transformed humans, most of which have gone insane and are incredibly hostile. The founder is placed as the game's antagonist, whose stories of manipulation and ambition are told through audio logs. BioShock. A deformed human, glowing lights for eyes, who is protecting a valuable organic resource found within other creatures, which the player needs to retrieve. BioShock. Interacting with food objects has the player just struck it down, regaining any lost health. BioShock. Flashing images. BioShock. Ghostly visions. BioShock. The player walks into a room where they see the game's iconic monster walking down an adjacent hallway, unaware or uncaring of the pit.
What makes this clip different is that it plays clips that show the comparisons in a more direct manner that an audience can actually agree with. Furthermore, he lists more examples later on that heavily dip into story-related content. Some of the examples that you show here, for how Bending the Dark Revival rips off BioShock, don't work nearly as well. Some are just establishing shots, something present in many a game, not just Bendy. Another is an enemy lunging at you in a similar manner that looks similar, but it is also nothing new in gaming. The lack of story comparisons or explanations is where these clips really bite you in the ass. What's the substance of these clips? What is the context surrounding them? The clip of Audrey working and then just cutting to some woman smoking and saying her name tells me nothing. That insinuates that this is a ripoff. I'm not familiar with BioShock at all. That's somebody new. I am absolutely confused on what makes this comparison hold any type of weight, and it demonstrates why Wolf should have gone into further detail with these comparisons. This is only the example that stands out most. I just know if I try going through each, we'd be here for far, far too long.
But anyway, the BioShock aesthetics aside, what's really left? Well, just 4 things. Minimal gameplay with shallow characters and a lot of fetch quests. And the dangling carrot of lore is what carries it. Now, remember those 4 things, okay? So, Garden of Bonbon, sorry to give you whiplash on the topics there, but Garden of Bonbon, released on January 6, 2023. Now, interestingly, Bendy creator The Meatly released a little game of their own on January 23rd, 2023. That seems to be a direct response to Garden of Bonbon. It's called Meatly's Storage World, and it's a biting satire of mascot horror. Look, there's a link to merch on the main menu. Oh, Meatly, you scamp. Anyway, Meatly's Storage World is a pretty simple game that you can complete in about 5 minutes. Basically, you just walk around the map and search for numbers in the Storage World lockers and read extremely sarcastic notes about hidden lore and secrets while you try to avoid the antagonist, which is this sock puppet character that Meatly has had for years. The character's given no backstory in the game or anything. And at the end, you're told to pre-order part 2, and then he brags he made the whole thing in just one day as a joke. But it's obviously more than a joke, isn't it? It's a scathing critique of the state of mascot horror games, a withering commentary of the genre's flaws, and an obvious parody of Garden of Bonbon in particular. But the thing I found interesting about Meatly's Storage World is that the cardinal sins it commits are actually very similar to the flaws I find in the Bendy games. Minimal gameplay, shallow characters, and fetch quests. Oh, and the dangling carrot of lore, can't forget that one.
Wolf, this is not a fair comparison in the slightest. As you stated, this was made in under a day, and obviously was meant as satire on the current state of indie horror games. With this information, I'm bugged particularly by 2 of these. Minimal gameplay, true. Fetch quest objectives, also true. My issue comes with the others. Dangling lore carrot. What? There's literally no lore to this game whatsoever though. For context, through this joke of a game, you find notes stuck on the walls. These notes are meant to parody stuff like what's found in games like Slender, Poppy Playtime, FNAF, even Bendy itself will come back to that. And the closest thing to lore that's found there is a note with the horrifying message. Which is something I can hardly count as lore. Who do you think I am, MatPat?
You're prettier!
The same applies to the shallow characters complaint, because this isn't a story-focused game. The character depth you're looking for wouldn't be here, given the reasons I listed prior. Heck, even if there was, the characters being shallow, if anything, would only back up the idea of this being an effective satire. It's not like the argument you made with Bendy earlier, that was a full hours game that had a full story. Meatley Storage Room is a game you can complete in the same time it takes me to make a sandwich. Not one of those overgrown, messy things, like a simple, nice peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Yeah, I'm a basic bitch, what of it?
It's certainly an interesting take to cynically poke fun at mascot horror games being used as vehicles for merchandise, when Bendy and the Ink Machine Chapter 3 quite heavy-handedly did exactly that.
So what if I went and painted some of those Bendy dolls with a crooked smile?
Plushies available for purchase at the Bendy store. Just saying, seems like this glass house has a huge broken window in it where a giant stone was hurled through at hurricane force speeds. You know, I'm just gonna say it. For all of Garten of Bonbon's flaws, and make no mistake, there are a lot of them. That sounds like the sound effect in Star Wars when Obi-Wan Kenobi is like powering down the Death Star or whatever. The sins that it commits are not so different from the ones found in Poppy or Bendy. It's just that those two have a much nicer coat of paint on them. I know Bendy and Poppy have plenty of fans that would refute that, but there's a reason Bonbon borrows so heavily from those two series.
Now, I want to focus on the Bendy portion of this because this is really bad faith criticism. For one, and well, this is admittedly a hypothetical, so take this as you will. You do have to consider that this did come from the same guy who made Bendy. With this knowledge, one has to consider the possibility that this was done to poke fun at himself as well. This is a credible idea, if not just due to the creator, but due to the nature of the game. An enemy that runs after you, rather reminiscent of the way Bendy does. Ketchup on the floor, made to look like blood, similar to the ink on the walls that have been a Bendy staple since day one. More than likely, it could be a jab at Bam Bam as well, as a bit of self-humor. His argument here is nothing more than speculation, and with the nature of this video as a whole, his argument could be considered as making the Meatly out to be way worse than he actually is.
But wait! There's more!
Around the point of me waiting to get this script checked, I found out about this comment that was left on a YouTuber's channel named Manly Badass Hero, where this was said. Now to clarify, this point isn't expecting you to have known about this comment ahead of time. That'd just be unreasonable, frankly. The point I'm trying to get across at here, though, is that simply put, you jumped the gun. The creator is aware of the flaws in his own game. Now, it's fair of you to come to your own opinions about it. Again, you probably didn't know about this comment. But even then, this just, one, makes his point just not age particularly well, and two, shows this just reeks of bad faith critique. And well, I'll be touching on this later in my final thoughts. The comparison about money doesn't even work. Once more, this feels like an argument made in bad faith, in part because Bendy Chapter 3 came out around 6 years ago. It took 3 chapters for them to start selling merch, and whoa, yeah, no, that whole aspect of the franchise is one I can't quite defend. It's unfair to compare it to Bam Bam, which had a merch store out literally the day it released. Did both end up having merch? Yeah, sure, you won't find me arguing that, but one clearly just did it worse. Furthermore, given how the clip you share is just lore building, mostly, this is a clear example of looking too far when the curtains are blue. Poking fun at some crooked business to happen years later is valid, even if it was hypocrisy, which in this case doesn't fit quite well. it wouldn't make the overall satire of the game wrong. It could be argued that Bendy is the reason why this exists, but putting aside that there's nothing that particularly helps prove that, even then, that's more likely to be probably Playtime's influence, given how it did the exact same thing as Bam Bam, just with a bit of NFTs on the side, cause...
We've got to have money.
Thank you. Now continuing on... Okay, we've made our point.
1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4...
Okay, now you're just doing this to screw with me. Anyways, one could also argue that this too is a fault of Bendy, since Poppy is a game that also seems heavily inspired off of Bendy, in some attributes at least. But that's more jumping the Siri territory. This kind of leads into my final thoughts, and I have quite a bit to say. That being said, this isn't even the only instance of this bad faith critique I've talked about either, because we have this little gem I found in the comments as well, which is another example of looking way too deep into things, because this is speculation at best. When the original commenter wasn't even sure. But there's nothing to prove this. Joey is made into a good guy. Yes, but also no. In the lore of the Dark Revival, Joey has a redemption of sorts, yes. But who's to say it's not just character development or change? Hell, it's not even like the whole history of the first Bendy game was erased. Joey is still at fault for making a war with the sole purpose of torturing one singular person. Honestly, this seems really petty. Okay, now I'm done. Now, Wolf, I don't really dislike the entirety of this video. You can probably tell, given how I skipped about 2/3 of it. I actually agree with most of the video as a whole. Where far the part for me particular is where Bendy gets brought into the picture. This isn't due to me being a fan of the series, but honestly, a lot of the parts where it gets brought up just feels overly harsh, if not incredibly biased. In a video that's explaining the ups and downs of indie horror, I feel like you did a rather poor job trying to explain why Bendy was one of the downs. Look, I've seen some of your Bendy videos before. Hell, I purposely watched your final thoughts at the end of your Dark Revival playthrough before making the script. And like, I get it, you found the games disappointing. This isn't a video meant to bring you into the cult of the Ink Demon, but I feel like that disappointment bled into this video, and not in a good way. A lot of the comparisons or critiques just didn't work when trying to explain the flaws, and the overall tone came off as pretentious a bit, and overly harsh for no reason, especially in the Meatly storage part, which frankly made it really aggravating to watch. This isn't even counting this portion of the video I decided to skip.
Cuphead? If you asked me to sell this game to you in one sentence, I'd say, you slay cartoon monsters in a completely hand-drawn 1930s animation-style world. Now, if you asked me to sell Bendy to you in one sentence, I'd say, you collect items for and speed date cartoon characters that you can buy as plushies afterwards. No,
which overall just felt like a super biased description made to make one game look way better than the other. I don't care if it was meant to be a joke, even with the delivery. The rest of the video makes it difficult for me to actually tell whether this was some kind of hyperbole or not. I'm not even gonna say that you shouldn't feel disappointed or anything of that nature. Lord knows I'm not a fan of the original Bendy and the Ink Machine, and now it just hasn't aged very well as a game at all. But regardless, I can't help but feel there was some kind of absolute bias going into that segment, and in videos like this, frankly, those are the best kept at the door. If I am to give critique on how to improve your content with videos in the future if you decide to make a video like this again, I advise not letting your own biases cloud your judgment too much when going to videos like this. I'm emphasizing too much here specifically, because I know it's practically impossible to go into a video like this without some hint of bias. On that note, however, that leads into my second issue. See, the video itself wasn't bad, but it felt like it kind of went away from the topic of the ups and downs of indie horror to just a large portion choosing to bitch about Bendy because. Frankly, I'd recommend if you have a topic like this you're clearly invested in, just choose to make it a separate video entirely perhaps. You honestly probably could have split this into a topic on indie horror and a separate video on the Bendy franchise as a whole, and it would have been better off as a result. That was easier than expected. It almost felt familiar? Strange. No, I'd like to wait a bit before releasing a next one. we have more than enough stored up from this. Though I'm not sure what I'd like to cover. Pokemon? Pokemon. Hold on just a second. Why is there so much material for this?